On October 14, 1947, at an altitude of 43,000 feet over the Mojave Desert, Chuck Yeager pushed the throttle on a bright orange research aircraft to maximum and pulled back toward the speed of sound. 2 ribs were broken. He'd cracked them 2 nights earlier, falling off a horse in the dark, drunk, after a desert dinner with his wife. He hadn't reported the injury because reporting it would have grounded him. So he'd driven to the airfield in the pre-dawn dark, found a broom handle, and with it managed to get the aircraft door latched without using his full right arm. His navigator had been told. Nobody else in the program knew. At Mach 0.97, the controls began to shake. At Mach 0.99, they went loose, the sound waves were stacking up ahead of the aircraft, and the plane was beginning to lose aerodynamic response in ways that had killed test pilots before. Earlier research aircraft had broken apart trying to go faster. Yeager kept going. The needle passed Mach 1.0. The shaking stopped. The sky in front of him went silent. He had passed through the sound barrier. Behind him, on the ground, the observers heard the boom. One of them said on the radio, "What was that?" They didn't know what had happened. Yeager knew. He went back for breakfast. That was Chuck Yeager. But the story of how a poor kid from West Virginia became the first man to break the sound barrier begins 4 years earlier, over the forests of occupied France. Charles Elwood Yeager was born on February 13, 1923, in Myra, West Virginia, and grew up in Hamlin, a small town in the hills of the Kanawha River Valley. His father dug natural gas wells. The family was poor in the way that rural Depression-era Appalachia was poor. Not destitute, but accustomed to making everything count. He was a natural shot. He hunted from the time he was a boy. Squirrel, possum, deer, anything in the hills around Hamlin that could feed the family or could be sold. His eyes were extraordinary. Sharp, fast to acquire movement, capable of tracking a target across terrain that other people couldn't read. He had the patience that hunting requires, and the mechanical intuition that working-class boys who fix things rather than bought them often develop early. When he enlisted in the Army Air Corps in September 1941, 2 months before Pearl Harbor, drawn in part by the $10 a month flying bonus on top of the standard soldier's pay, he had never been inside an airplane. Within months, his instructors had identified him as exceptional. Not just a good pilot, an exceptional one, someone with what the Air Corps was calling natural flying ability, a spatial intuition and control sensitivity that couldn't be fully taught. He received his wings in March 1943. He was 20 years old. Yeager flew his first combat mission in October 1943 as a member of the 357th Fighter Group, based in England. He was flying a P-39 Airacobra, which was adequate but not the best fighter the Army had. His 8th mission on March 4, 1944, nearly ended everything. He was escorting bombers when his flight was bounced by German FW-190s out of the sun. Standard ambush technique. The 190s hit the formation hard and fast. Yeager's aircraft was badly damaged, probably by fire from another FW-190 that he never saw coming. He went down over the Bordeaux region of France. He bailed out. He made it to the ground alive, having been hit in the right foot by shrapnel. He landed in the forest, ditched his parachute, and began moving. What followed was the kind of weeks that turn boys into something else. He was picked up by a French Maquis resistance unit, one of the networks that operated in the forests and hills of southwestern France, sheltering Allied airmen, moving them south toward Spain and freedom. He moved mostly at night. He slept in barns and farmhouses. He learned quickly that the people hiding him were risking their lives in a way that went well beyond anything he had been asked to risk. Families with children, farmers who depended on the German administration's tolerance for their livelihood, taking in an American airman who spoke no French. One of the men escorting him, a Frenchman named Gabriel Mach, was killed in a German ambush during the journey south. Yeager remembered him for the rest of his life. He crossed the Pyrenees on foot in March, through snow and altitude that his damaged foot made agonizing, and came out the other side into Spain. He was interned briefly, made contact with American diplomatic officials, and was eventually repatriated to England. Here the story takes a turn that most people don't know about. There was a policy. Airmen who had evaded capture and returned through the escape networks were not to fly combat again. The reason was specific and practical. If an evader was shot down again and captured, and the Germans discovered he had traveled through the escape network, through the hands of French Maquis across the Pyrenees by specific routes, he might be coerced into revealing information that would get the network destroyed and the people in it killed. The policy was not a punishment. It was a protection for the network members whose lives depended on their continued secrecy. Yeager understood this. He also wanted to go back. He had come to England to fight. He had 11 missions left in his tour, and sitting in a support role while the war continued felt to him like something between cowardice and waste. He asked for an exception. His commanding officers said no. He asked again. They said no again. He wrote a request that eventually went up the chain through the 357th's command, through 8th Air Force, to SHAEF, Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, and was ultimately reviewed by Dwight D. Eisenhower himself. Eisenhower considered the request carefully. He knew the policy and the reasons for it. He also recognized that the timing mattered. The invasion of France was imminent, and with it would come the liberation of exactly the territory where Yeager had evaded. The escape networks would become irrelevant the moment Allied troops arrived. The risk the policy was designed to prevent would largely disappear. Eisenhower approved the exception. Yeager went back to combat. The new P-51 Mustang was a different aircraft from the P-39 Yeager had been shot down in. It was one of the finest fighter aircraft of the war, long-range, fast, maneuverable, with performance that could match anything the Luftwaffe was flying. Yeager was a different pilot, too. Not older by much, it was September 1944, barely 6 months since his return, but different in the way that surviving something and choosing to come back changes a person. On September 8, 1944, Yeager's flight encountered a large formation of German aircraft over the Rhine. In the engagement that followed, in a period of minutes, Yeager shot down 5 FW-190s. 5 kills in a single mission. The definition of an ace is 5 confirmed kills over a career. He achieved it in under an hour. He also described in his autobiography achieving a kill that has never been fully categorized. While chasing an enemy jet, a Messerschmitt Me-262, the world's first operational jet fighter, he maneuvered into a firing position by patience and geometry rather than speed, catching the jet at a vulnerable moment of approach. He was the first American pilot to destroy one in the air. By the end of his combat tour, Yeager had 11.5 aerial kills. He was 21 years old. After the war, Yeager was assigned as a maintenance officer and test pilot to Muroc Army Airfield in the Mojave Desert, which would eventually become Edwards Air Force Base, the center of American flight research. The sound barrier was the great challenge of the era. At high subsonic speeds, compressibility effects, the stacking of pressure waves ahead of the aircraft, caused control problems severe enough to destroy a plane. Several test pilots had lost their lives pushing toward it. The British de Havilland Swallow had broken up at approximately Mach 0.9 in 1946, killing its pilot, Geoffrey de Havilland Jr. The Bell X-1, a bullet-shaped rocket plane carried aloft by a B-29 and dropped, was designed to solve the problem. Its horizontal stabilizer could be adjusted in flight, giving the pilot control even as the standard elevators lost effectiveness in compressibility. It was the right design. Yeager was assigned to the program in 1947. He flew the X-1 repeatedly, pushing higher each time approaching the barrier and pulling back, familiarizing himself with the aircraft's behavior. On October 12, 1947, 2 days before the scheduled attempt, he and his wife Glenys went riding. In the dark, he was thrown from his horse, hit a fence rail, and broke 2 ribs on his right side. He did not report this to the flight surgeon, reporting it would end the program. He drove to a local veterinarian who taped the ribs. He told only Jack Ridley, the project engineer, who helped him figure out how to close the X-1's door using the broom handle he brought to the flight. On October 14, 1947, Yeager flew the X-1 at Mach 1.07. The sound barrier was broken. The flight was classified for 8 months. When it was announced, the name Charles Yeager appeared in newspapers around the world. He was 24 years old, a farm boy from West Virginia, a combat veteran of Nazi France and German skies, now the fastest human being who had ever lived. Yeager continued to fly for the Air Force for another 2 decades, setting additional speed and altitude records, training other pilots, flying combat in Vietnam as an advisor. He retired as a brigadier general in 1975. Tom Wolfe, in The Right Stuff, used Yeager as the archetype of the test pilot, the man with the unnameable quality that separated the ones who came back from the ones who didn't. Wolfe's book and the 1983 film that followed made Yeager famous again, and he spent his later decades doing exactly what he always had: flying. He made his last flight, a recreation of the sound barrier flight in an F-15, on October 14, 2012, his 65th anniversary of the original. He was 89 years old. He died on December 7, 2020, Pearl Harbor Day. He was 97. His wife's name, Glennis, the woman whose name he painted on the X-1, is the name on the aircraft that sits today in the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum. A West Virginia boy who could shoot squirrels, who bailed out over France, who walked across the Pyrenees on a wounded foot, who convinced Eisenhower to give him his war back, who became an ace in a single afternoon, who pushed past the sound barrier with 2 broken ribs and a broom handle for a door latch. He had the right stuff, all right? If this story moved you, subscribe to follow the Untold Front. New stories every week.